In the spring of 1900, somewhere in the St. Croix River country between Minnesota and Wisconsin, a crew of river men stood beside a wooden dam and waited for the water to become a machine. Behind the dam was a pond that had not existed before. In that pond were logs. White pine, cut through the winter, hauled by horses and sleds to the banks of frozen streams, rolled into the water when the thaw came, and now waiting for one violent thing to happen. The gate had to open. When it did, the quiet pond would become a flood. Thousands of logs would move at once. Not on trucks, not on railroad cars, not on paved roads. On water. The same stream that had been too shallow to float timber yesterday would suddenly carry an entire winter's work downstream. Men with peaveys and pike poles would run along the banks, step onto floating timber, break jams, dodge rolling logs, and try to keep the drive moving before the water dropped. If they did it right, the forest would travel. If they did it wrong, the river could turn into a trap of wood, current, and crushing weight. This was how America moved timber before trucks could reach the woods. Not with one machine. Not with one road. But with winter, horses, axes, dams, spring melt, and men willing to work on a moving floor that could kill them. The machine was the river. The switch was a wooden gate. And the workers who used it were called river drivers. This is the story of splash dams. The forgotten wooden structures loggers built to send forests downstream before modern hauling equipment took over. To understand why anyone would build a dam just to release a flood, you have to start with the size of the problem. The American timber industry did not grow around meat roads and convenient loading docks. It grew in forests. Deep forests. Wet forests. Cold forests. Mountain forests. Forests with no paved roads, no diesel trucks, no hydraulic loaders, no modern bridges, and no easy way to get a giant tree from the stump to the mill. In the 19th century, timber was not a decorative resource, it was a foundation material. America needed wood for houses, barns, ships, bridges, railroads, mines, factories, docks, barrels, furniture, fuel, fencing, telegraph poles, and the frame of expansion itself. Cities grew on timber. Railroads rested on timber. Mines used timber to hold back the earth. Factories burned it, packed goods in it, and built around it. The problem was not only cutting the tree, the problem was moving it. A large log is simple to describe and miserable to handle. It is long, it is heavy. It rolls. It gets stuck, it sinks into mud. It breaks equipment. It can crush a man with no warning. Before trucks, moving timber through the woods meant using the season as part of the transport system. Winter did the first half of the job. Logging crews went into the woods when the ground froze and snow covered the trails. Trees were felled with axes and crosscut saws. Branches were trimmed away, logs were hauled by horses or oxen on sleds over iced roads. Those roads were not modern roads. They were winter roads, built and maintained for one purpose: slide the cut timber toward a river, stream, lake, or landing before spring. In Maine, a typical winter logging camp might have 25 to 60 men, each with a specialized job. Choppers cut the trees, others limbed them. Teamsters handled horses or oxen. Camp cooks kept men fed through cold, repetitive, exhausting labor. Every job aimed at the same spring moment: get the logs to water. Because once the ice broke and the rivers rose, the second half of the transportation system began. The log drive. The idea was beautiful in its simplicity. If a river flows toward the mill, let the river carry the logs. Water does not need hay. Water does not need rails. Water can move what men and animals cannot easily drag. But rivers are not conveyor belts, they are irregular, shallow, rocky, seasonal, and stubborn. A big river in spring might carry logs well, a small tributary might not. Some streams were too narrow, some were too shallow, some had rocks, bends, sandbars, fallen trees, rapids, and low water. A log that floats in one place can jam in another, 10 logs can become a tangle. 1,000 logs can become a wooden wall. That was the bottleneck. America had the trees. It had men to cut them. It had horses to haul them in winter, it had mills hungry for lumber. But between the forest and the mill was a stream that did not always have enough water to do the job. So loggers built their own floods. A splash dam was a simple structure, with a violent purpose. It was usually built of logs, timber, earth, rock, and whatever the location allowed. It blocked a stream and held water back until a pond formed behind it.
Logs were floated into that pond or stacked nearby, waiting for the release. Then, when the gate opened or the dam was otherwise released, the stored water surged downstream. The sudden flood lifted logs that would otherwise sit grounded in the channel. It shoved them over rocks. It pushed them through narrow places. It carried them toward larger rivers where they could join a bigger drive. Then the process could be repeated. Hold water, load logs, release, chase the drive, break the jams, hold water again, release again. It was not gentle. It was not clean. It was not good for the stream. But it solved one brutal physical problem. How do you move thousands of tons of timber out of a place where no truck can go?
You make the creek bigger for a few minutes. That was the breakthrough. Not a modern engine, not a road network, not a fleet of haulers. A dam that turned stored water into temporary power. The splash dam did not make the river safe. It made the river useful. There's a difference. A useful river could still kill a man. River drivers were the men who lived inside that difference. Their job was not just to stand on shore and watch what float by. They had to keep the drive moving. They carried peaveys, cant dogs, pike poles, and other long-handled tools used to push, roll, pry, and steer timber. A peavey had a spike and a hook that could bite into a log. With it, a skilled man could turn a rolling trunk, pull one log off another, or loosen the piece that held a jam together. But every move had consequences. A log jam looks solid from a distance. Up close, it is stored violence. Current presses against it. More logs pile behind it. Water rises. Pressure builds. The whole river is trying to move, and the jam is the thing stopping it. The dangerous part is that one key log can hold the structure together. Find it, pry it, cut it, or blast it, and the jam can break. When it breaks, it does not break politely. Logs leap. Water surges. The surface that looked like a floor becomes a landslide. A man standing in the wrong place can fall between logs, be pinned, be rolled under, be hit by timber, or be carried into rapids. That is why river driving became a job wrapped in skill, pride, and bravado. The best drivers could read water. They could read wood. They knew when to step and when to stay off. They knew which logs were floating and which were ready to roll. They knew where a jam might release. They knew how to move fast on something that wanted to move faster. To outsiders, it could look reckless. To the men doing it, recklessness was not the same as skill. Skill was knowing exactly how close to danger the job required them to go. Sometimes that line was only a boot width wide. The work was wet, cold, loud, and temporary. It followed the season. A winter crew cut and hauled. A spring crew drove. Men slept in rough camps, moved with the drive, ate hard meals, handled wet tools, and worked around water that could change in an hour. The drive did not wait for comfort. If the water was right, they worked. If the logs were moving, they followed. If a jam formed, they went to it. If the water dropped too soon, a winter's worth of timber could be stranded. That pressure explains why splash dams mattered. They gave lumbermen a way to control time. Only a little, only temporarily. But in the woods, a temporary advantage could be the difference between logs reaching the mill and logs rotting in a stream bed. On the St. Croix River system, the scale became enormous. By 1900, lumbermen had transformed the watershed. The amount of drivable river increased from less than 100 miles in 1840 to more than 800 miles by 1900. That did not happen naturally. It happened because men cleared channels, straightened streams, removed obstacles, built dams, and turned wild water into a timber transport network. On the St. Croix and its tributaries, 60 to 70 gated dams were built, along with hundreds of temporary splash dams. Think about what that means. Not one dam, not one clever trick, a whole river system modified so logs could move. The forest was being converted into lumber, and the river was being converted into machinery. One of the most ambitious structures in that system was Nevers Dam. Built in 1889, it stood about 11 miles upstream from a notorious logjam point in the Dalles known as Angle Rock. The problem at Angle Rock had become serious enough that ordinary driving was not enough. Logs jammed, traffic backed up, timber that represented money, labor, contracts, and whole seasons of work could choke the river. So lumbermen built a larger control point upstream. Nevers Dam stretched about 614 feet across the river. It was reported as one of the largest wood pile-driven structures in the world at the time. It cost more than $250,000, an enormous sum for a wooden structure built to control logs and water. Behind it, the dam created a flowage roughly 15 miles long. It used large gates to regulate how many logs went downstream and when. It even had electric lights, so sluicing could continue around the clock. That detail matters. Electric lights on a log dam tell you this was not a quaint backwoods habit. This was industrial control. The river had become part of corporate system. Water was scheduled. Logs were counted. Tolls could be charged. Gates could decide which timber moved and how much reached the danger point at a time. Nevers Dam was not exactly the same as a temporary splash dam on a small tributary, but belonged to the same larger idea. Do not wait for the river to cooperate. Control the head of water. Release it when the work demands. Turn flow into force. That is the heart of the story. Before trucks carried logs over roads, before diesel skidders dragged them to landings, before loaders stacked them on trailers, and before permanent forest roads cut deep into timber country, lumbermen used gravity and water as their hauling system. They built temporary power into the landscape. Then they released it on a small stream. The release of a splash dam could be crude. Water backed up. Logs waited. The gate opened or the dam broke. The flood ran downstream. Sometimes obstacles below were blasted out first. Natural jams, boulders, and channel features that slowed the drive were treated as problems to remove. The stream was not seen as habitat in the modern sense. It was seen as a route that needed improving. That attitude was not unique to one region. In the Pacific Northwest, splash dams became common from the late 19th century into the 20th. On the lower Columbia and its tributaries, loggers began using makeshift splash dams in the early 1870s. By 1910, there were 56 splash dams on the lower Columbia system. In Western Oregon, splash damming remained common from the 1880s through the 1950s. The technique worked because it was simple and because roads were expensive. Building a proper road into remote timber was hard. Maintaining it through rain, mud, landslides, and forest terrain was harder. Rails helped in some regions, and logging railroads became their own industry. But railroads cost money too. They required grading, ties, rails, bridges, locomotives, fuel, crews, and maintenance. A small stream was already there. The water fell downhill for free. The question was how to make it carry logs that were too heavy and too numerous for normal flow. Splash dams answer that question with stored gravity. When a pond fills behind a dam, energy is being stored. The higher and larger the water, the more work it can do when released. Open the gate, and that potential energy becomes moving water. Put logs in that water, and the stream becomes a temporary transport machine. This is why the old method feels both clever and destructive. The loggers did not misunderstand the physics. They understood it very well. They knew the stream needed depth. They knew the logs needed momentum. They knew a pulse of water could do what normal flow could not. They built systems around that knowledge. But the river paid for it. Repeated splash, damming, scour channels. It widened streams. It tore up banks. It flushed sediment. It damaged fish habitat. It stranded sections of channel between releases and then hammered them with sudden flood. For salmon and steelhead in the Pacific Northwest, the effect was devastating. Egg nests could be dewatered when flows dropped, then buried or torn apart when artificial floods surged through. Young fish could be swept away. Sawdust, bark, debris, and mill waste added to the damage downstream. The same method that moved timber to market could leave a river less alive than it had been before. That is one of the hard truths of old infrastructure. The work built America. It also injured places America later had to restore. The goal here is not to pretend the old way was pure. It was not. It was dangerous for workers and destructive for rivers. But it was also a rational answer to the physical and economic world loggers lived in. They did not have modern roads into every valley. They did not have fleets of highway trucks. They did not have hydraulic loaders and satellite mapping. They had winter roads, animals, hand tools, timber structures, steam power in some places, and water. So they used water hard. That phrase belongs to the era. They used water hard. They dammed it. They stored it. They timed it. They sold access to it. They fought over it. They rode it, worked it, feared it, and sometimes died in it. The men in the drive were not environmental policymakers. They were workers trying to get the logs down before the season failed. Their danger was immediate. A cold river does not need to be deep to kill. A man who falls between rolling logs may not get the chance to swim. The logs can close around him. Current can pull him under. Wet boots could drag him down. A jam can release while men are still on it. A pike pole can slip. A peavey can fail to bite. A log can spin underfoot without warning. This is why river driving demanded athleticism and nerve. Drivers ran on logs because there was no walkway where the work was needed. They worked from banks when they could, from boats when they had them, and from the logs themselves when the jam demanded it. They learned balance the way sailors learn weather. Not from theory alone, from repetition, bruises, close calls, and watching older men. The tool in a driver's hand was simple. The situation was not. A peavey looks like a pole with a hook. But in skilled hands, it becomes a lever, a brake, a probe, a steering tool, and sometimes the only thing between a man and the current. With one point and one hook, a driver could roll a log away from a jam, shove timber toward the channel, pull himself back from a bad step, or test whether the wood under him would hold. That is the kind of old tool built before machines is about. It is not impressive because it is complicated. It is impressive because everything depends on how it is used. Modern machines often hide skill inside hydraulics, engines, and controls. Old tools expose skill. If a man misread the river, no machine corrected him. If he stepped wrong, no harness caught him. If he broke the wrong part of a jam first, the river taught the lesson instantly. The river drive also changed the rhythm of communities. In Maine, on rivers like the Penobscot and the Kennebec, the drive was more than a transport job. It was a seasonal event. Men came out of winter camps. Logs went into the water. Crews followed the drive downstream. Towns knew when the river was moving wood. Mills waited. Boarding houses, stores, cook camps, and local businesses felt the traffic of men and money. For much of the 19th and 20th centuries, the river was not recreation first. It was industry. People did business on it. They moved timber on it. They dumped waste into it. They measured its value by what it could carry. That older river can be hard to imagine now, especially in places where tourists raft, fish, paddle, and photograph the same water. But many rivers that look recreational today once worked like industrial roads. The difference is that roads hold still. Rivers fight back. The end of the log drive era came slowly, then suddenly. Roads improved. Trucks became more capable. Railroads reached timber country. Skidders, tractors, bulldozers, loaders, chainsaws, and later specialized forestry machines changed the economics of logging. Environmental law changed the acceptable cost. In Maine, log driving lasted longer than many outsiders would expect. On the Kennebec River, the practice continued into the 1970s. Before the state ended it, the Kennebec Log Driving Company was moving around 300,000 cords of wood a year down the river. In 1976, Maine made it illegal to float logs down the Kennebec. That same year, the last commercial drive came through. An old transport system that had shaped work, towns, rivers, and memory was over. Trucks took over. Roads took over. The river was no longer the main machine. The change solved some problems and created others. Truck hauling meant logs could move on schedule without waiting for the spring freshet. It reduced the need to choke rivers with timber and sudden flood pulses. It let companies manage delivery more precisely, but also meant roads cut deeper into forests. Temporary bridges, culverts, skid roads, erosion, fuel, maintenance, and heavy equipment became part of the new cost. The danger did not disappear. It changed shape. That is another pattern in the history of machines. Old systems do not vanish because they were foolish. They vanish when a new system becomes cheaper, more controllable, more legally acceptable, or more profitable. Splash dams vanished because roads, trucks, railroads, environmental law, and industrial forestry made them less acceptable and less necessary. But for a long time, they worked well enough to reshape rivers. And that is why they deserve to be remembered. Not as a quaint detail, not as a cartoon lumberjack scene, as infrastructure. A splash dam was infrastructure. A river drive was infrastructure. A winter logging road was infrastructure. A boom that caught and sorted logs was infrastructure. A crew of men with peaveys was human infrastructure. Together, they moved forests. Without them, much of the 19th century timber economy would have stalled at the edge of the woods. Think of the full chain. A tree stands in a remote forest. Men cut in winter. Horses drag it over snow. It waits beside a frozen stream. Spring opens the water. A splash dam stores the flow. The gate releases. The logs surge downstream. River drivers chase them. Jams form. Men break them. Larger rivers collect the drive. Booms sort the logs by ownership. Mills saw them into lumber. Railroads, ships, and wagons carry that lumber into towns and cities. A house goes up. A mine is braced. A bridge gets timbers. A factory ships goods in wooden crates. A nation grows. And at the beginning of that chain is a stream temporarily turned into a flood. That is the beauty and danger of the old system. It connected the stump to the city with almost no modern road. It used gravity where engines were absent. It used water where wheels could not go. It used men where machines did not yet exist. The river drivers rarely became famous. Their names were not stamped on the boards that reached the city. The house buyer did not know who broke the jam upstream. The railroad did not know who risked his life keeping the logs moving. The mill owner might know the crew as a cost. The river knew them as footsteps on wetwood. That is the part most histories skip. They talk about lumber. They talk about companies. They talk about board feet, mills, railroads, and markets. Those things matter. But a log does not move because a market wants it. It moves because someone put a tool into it. Someone cut it. Someone hauled it. Someone dammed the stream. Someone opened the gate. Someone stood on a rolling log and pushed it into the current. Someone went to the jam when everyone on shore could see how dangerous it had become. Before machines, that someone was the system. The river drive also shows how old work depended on timing in a way modern viewers can miss. A truck can leave at 10 in the morning. A train can be scheduled. A loader can run when the operator starts the engine. But a log drive depended on winter snow, spring melt, rainfall, river height, dam water, and daylight. Too little water and log stranded. Too much water and the drive became uncontrollable. Cold water slowed men and killed quickly. Late thaw delayed the season. Early heat changed the flow. The whole operation lived inside a weather window. Splash dams gave lumbermen more control, but never complete control. The river still had the final vote. That is one reason the work produced so many stories. Danger creates memory. So does skill. So does a job that only exists for a few weeks each year and then disappears until the next spring. The men who drove logs had a seasonal identity. They were not just laborers in a factory repeating the same motion under the same roof. They followed a moving workplace. The workplace changed every bend, every rock, every fall, every eddy, every jam, every dam, every bridge, and every sudden rise of water became part of the job. That is hard work to standardize. It is hard work to replace with a single tool, which is why, when modern machines did replace it, they changed more than transportation. They changed a culture. The old driver with a peavey gave way to the truck driver, the road crew, the skidder operator, the loader operator, the dispatcher, the mechanic, the forester, the environmental regulator, and the road engineer. Some skills vanished. Others appeared. The log still moved, but the river no longer carried the same authority. Today, traces of that old world remain in place names, old dam sites, river landings, museum photographs, archival interviews, and the channels themselves. On the St. Croix, the old Nevers Dam is gone, pulled out in the 1950s, but earthworks and related features are still visible near the landing. In parts of the Pacific Northwest, the legacy of splash damming remains written into stream shape and habitat damage. In Maine, the end of log driving helped open the way for a different relationship with rivers: recreation, restoration, rafting, fishing, and cleaner water. The same rivers that once carried industrial timber now carry memory. But memory can become too soft. It can turn river drivers into nostalgic figures in wool shirts and boots, all romance and no risk. The real work was harsher: cold mornings, wet hands, fast water, heavy tools, bad footing, long days, logs shifting underfoot, the sound of a jam beginning to move, the knowledge that if you fell in the wrong place, the river and the timber might not give you back. That is the human cost behind the old transport system. There were also costs paid by the river itself. Banks torn open, channels scoured, fish habitat damaged, sawdust and debris added downstream, streams treated as machines until people later had to learn how to treat them as living systems again. This is why the story is not simple. It is not just men against nature. It is men using nature as machinery. It is not just progress. It is extraction. It is not just damage. It is also skill, necessity, invention, and labor. The honest version holds all of that at once. Before modern machines, America did not float logs because it was quaint. It floated logs because it had to move massive weight through places where roads did not yet exist. Splash dams were one answer. They were temporary, rough, effective, and destructive. They made small water behave like big water. They made remote forests reachable. They turned creeks into conveyor belts for a few violent minutes at a time. They made the impossible repeatable. That is the phrase that keeps coming back in these stories. Before modern machinery, the great breakthrough was often not making a job easy. It was making it repeatable. Cut the tree, haul it to water, build the dam, fill the pond, open the gate, run the drive, break the jam, sort the logs. Do it again next season. Year after year, the process moved timber on a scale that helped build towns, railroads, mines, farms, mills, and cities. The men who did it were not thinking of themselves as symbols. They were working. They were earning wages. They were trying to stay warm, stay upright, and stay alive. They were trying to get the logs down before the water failed. And when the water did rise, they stepped into a job where the ground itself moved. That is what makes river driving different from so many other forms of old labor. A miner works under rock. A bridge man works above height. A tunnel crew works into a mountain. A river driver works on a floor that rolls, floats, shifts, and can vanish. There is no stable workplace. There is only movement. And before trucks, that movement built America. The next time you see a board, a beam, An old timber bridge, a mill town, a logging photograph, or a quiet river in former timber country. Imagine the old chain behind it. Not just the tree falling, the winter road, the horse team, the landing, the frozen stream, the dam, the pond filling, the gate opening, the flood, the logs hitting current, the drivers running with peaveys, the jam groaning before it breaks, the mill waiting downstream. That was the transport system. Wood, water, gravity, and men. No trucks, no diesel loaders, no paved forest roads, no modern safety gear, just the old river made briefly powerful enough to move a forest. If this story made you see old logging country differently, subscribe to Built Before Machines. This channel exists to remember the workers, tools, strange machines, and dangerous methods that built America before modern construction equipment took over. The algorithm remembers finished cities. It remembers railroads, skylines, houses, bridges, and mills. But it forgets the river driver standing on wet timber with a peavey in his hands, waiting for the jam to break. Before trucks reached the woods, men built wooden dams and borrowed the force of spring water. Then they sent the forest downstream,